Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kirby on Sports podcast. Once again, we have another special guest, another interview coming your way. First and foremost, I'm your host, Josh Kirby. I will apologize first and foremost as I am rolling without a microphone. The audio might sound a little bit different, trying to get it fixed as soon as I can. But we're going to roll with maybe some different audio quality, so I apologize in advance for that. Before we move any further, a big shout out to the sponsors of the Kirby on Sports podcast, PM Plus Reserves, Shenandoah Primitives, Transformative Alignment Group, Mark Francis with Icon Real Estate, Barrett, Pest, and Termite Services, Shenandoah Music, Mark Lynch with Guild Mortgage, and the official energy drink of the Kirby on Sports podcast, Don't Sleep Energy. Use promo code KOS Podcast for 12% off your order every single time. We would like to welcome on a very special guest about an hour south from our recording location, covering just about anything and everything JMU sports related from the Daily News Record, Shane Mettlen. Shane, what's going on, buddy? Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. How's everything going?
So far, so good. It's busy. The weather's changing, obviously. I know down there it's busy for you with the coverage of JMU's new AD that just got announced. But we'll get to that in just a moment, Shane. But again, thank you for joining us here on the Kirby on Sports podcast. Just first and foremost, briefly, just touch on how you got started in sports and how you ended up with the Daily News Record.
I got started with sports, just that, probably like a lot of people who get into the business, huge sports fan, like to play everything as a kid. It was always a big part of my life growing up. Played a lot of sports. I wasn't, great at very many of them. So, eventually at some point you kind of realize, okay, I'm not going to play in the NBA, but if I want to be in a career in sports, what are the other options? And, I was decent in English class compared to some of my other academic classes. So, being a sports writer seemed like something I could do, and, got into it. Did it in college, with student papers, things like that. And, just eventually kind of got into the newspaper industry and wound up in the Shenandoah Valley after a while, and kind of, me and my family settled down here, and really enjoy covering JMU. Kind of been, here since 2018. So it's been really fun to kind of be along for the ride and cover, the rise of the program from, being a really good FCS program, being a good mid-major program that won in a lot of sports, to what they've done over the past year. It's been kind of cool to see that go from things they'd already built something before I got on the beat, but like to see it go from where it was 5-6 years ago to where it is now has been a pretty incredible thing to cover.
The growth of JMU, even from the time you got to the DNR, is still substantial growth. And I just see their athletics program continuing to build and grow.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's just been really remarkable. Even 5-6 years ago when I started, and I came in kind of primarily as the basketball beat writer, and the women's basketball team was doing well. They were winning in a lot of other sports, but men's basketball wasn't a huge thing. Like a lot of people, didn't know much about the team, even the people on campus locally. And they've continued to build that up, along with like increased football success and going to the FBS level in football, and, doing, I think, even better at that level than people expected. People thought they'd be competitive making a jump because, good FCS programs have been in the past. They even exceeded that with, 11 wins in the second year, and, getting into a bowl game, and everything has come along with it. It's this entire school year, though, I think, even the most optimistic JMU fans, the diehards, probably couldn't have imagined everything that would happen over the course of one 9-month 2023, 2024 school year. It's just been like almost everything possible has broken JMU's way.
Well, Shane, I imagine this was one of your more busier coverage years. Let's rewind because we met. I was at the JMU UVA game, and obviously you were there covering it. I'm like, hey, I know that guy because I've read your work. I'm like, that's Shane Mettlen. Dropped you a card, made the connection. But just starting off with that game, obviously a lot of emotion in that game with obviously everything that happened with UVA. But just looking back at that game and how significant that game was, a big step forward for the UVA football program. And I saw coverage from JMU's side about how they support UVA and what they're going through. I mean, just an incredible day. And I was just honored to be there in person to see how they were remembering the lives of those three football players lost at UVA.
Yeah, it was a really like an emotional day on a lot of sides. Cause like you said, that was hanging over everything. And that was, they were honored before the game. There was a lot of that. And then, it's almost unfortunate that ended up being the first game back for UVA at home at Scott Stadium, because I think, they're to have been able to separate that maybe a little bit, them being able to honor those people and then also bringing JMU in for the first time in 40 years. There's almost conflicting emotions because it's like, you stop, you honor them, you're respectful, you're everything. You go through all that pregame and then it shifts gears to this, I don't know if you even call it a rivalry when they hadn't played in that long, but the two schools in close proximity geographically, the JMU fans, were there in large numbers. They have a chip on their shoulder that they put that aside for the pregame stuff. And then, once the game starts, that chip on the shoulder comes out. They're really loud. People probably been shocked. They have the hill there at Scott Stadium where a lot of UVA fans, students sit, typically sit. That people might've been shocked, like how many JMU fan students kind of infiltrated that. And then, there's back and forth between students that are there on the hill. And frankly, probably wasn't enough security nearby to start the game. And it was a unique situation all around. And then you throw in a long weather delay and, who comes back from that, who doesn't, as far as, fans and everything. It was a really, I haven't covered too many days like that as, on a football side of things where there was just so much going on around a game, and then ended up being a very entertaining, competitive, fun game to cover even beyond all that.
Well, let's just say that rain delay, I left at the start of it, and it was not a pleasant sight walking back to my vehicle in soaking wet clothes.
Yeah, and, we talk about everything that's happened to JMU over the course of the past year. What happens if they don't have that rain delay? UVA had a ton of momentum in that game.
Absolutely.
When it went out, they have the rain delay. JMU goes in. They kind of almost get like a second halftime to regroup and go in there. And then, frankly, when they come back, they, a lot of the JMU fans had come from, an hour to 2 hours away, and they'd been waiting 40 years for this game, and they'd spent their money and they'd, bought parking pads and everything else. Like, it was their only time they were going to be at Scott Stadium to watch JMU take on UVA, and they didn't leave after the rain delay. And a lot of UVA fans did. And I don't necessarily blame them that much because it was the first of home game of the season. It was, against not an ACC opponent. Like, they were going to be back to Scott Stadium. It wasn't, necessarily worth sticking around through the rain, but the JMU fans did. And it became a JMU home game after that lightning delay. And it really changed the dynamic of that game. And you got to wonder how much it changed the dynamic of JMU's season that they get that victory. And then, they reel off, 10 straight to start the season and, get into the top 25. And they have that as much as UVA kind of struggled throughout the season, JMU still had that, okay, we went in and won at an ACC team. So we have that on top of, a 10-0 record, and we deserve to be ranked. And that was all going in JMU's favor. And how much does that change if they don't have a little delay for lightning, and maybe they lose a close game instead of winning a close game? It really, you wonder how much the momentum kind of built that day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just mentioned running off 10 straight wins JMU did, unfortunately losing the college game day game to App State, but 10 straight wins getting into the top 25. This football team had a lot of momentum going, and that's where I would say all the coverage about the JMU football team trying to get into a bowl game, this and that. And I know you were on top of it with your coverage, and I'm not sure why a lot of people didn't like your coverage for some reason on that. I think you know what I'm referring to there, but I mean, just overall, they ended up getting the Armed Forces Bowl because there weren't enough teams eligible for a bowl, but still, it was just a crazy process going through, I think, waivers or something. Just explain that whole process and what you gathered out of your coverage from that whole ordeal.
Well, it got extremely complicated, and because throughout the whole season, basically, JMU technically not bowl eligible because they're second year of the transition from FCS to FBS. So they weren't bowl eligible, but there was always that provision that if you're in your second year and there's not enough teams that make it, then that transitioning team kind of goes to the top of the list of like who's then provisionally eligible to play in a bowl game. And it was always extremely likely that JMU was going to get into the postseason that way. It's just that, so I think, JMU all along was kind of preparing for being in a bowl game. They kind of knew they were going to be bowl eligible, but it's kind of a technicality. You can't be officially bowl eligible until the regular season ends, and that there's not enough teams to fill all those spots and all of that stuff. And so there was the knowledge that JMU was likely going to play in a bowl game, but the fact that they weren't officially eligible throughout the regular season then cast this doubt over, okay, so what happens if they do get in and they're the highest ranked group of 5 team? Are they, potentially going to play in a New Year's Six Bowl? Can they play in the Sun Belt Championship game if that's the case? Like, there were all these questions. And so JMU on their part kind of wanted to say, we know we're likely going to be bowl eligible, and our transition hasn't been the same as most teams' transitions because of a lot of factors, that too many factors kind of list like what that is, but it wasn't the normal transition, and the reasons for the transition rules kind of were outdated based on everything that's changed in college sports. And so, JMU kind of throughout that season, basically it was like, we know we're going to be bowl eligible, even if we can't officially be right now. We need to kind of proactively try to figure out, if we could possibly be the top ranked team, could we get into the, group of 5, spot for the New Year's Six Bowls and everything else. And they kind of wanted to get that sorted out. And it seemed like they were going to have to do that maybe by getting a waiver from the NCAA. They didn't get the waiver from the NCAA. And then the Attorney General for Virginia gets involved in that, wanted to basically file suit against the NCAA to allow them to be bowl eligible, which then if the courts had ruled that JMU was bowl eligible, then the college football playoff could say, okay, now we're going to rank JMU because they've now legally been declared bowl eligible. So we can put them in our rankings. And then the Sun Belt Conference could say, well, if they're bowl eligible because the court says they are, then we have no reason to keep them out of our championship game now. Like all these things could have like happened if they'd have gotten that court ruling. And then, kind of at the last minute, they lose that game to App State game day, like you said. That was going to be the next week was when they were going to file with the federal court in Harrisonburg to try to, get an injunction, which would have, made them eligible until that could go to court, which would have been long after the season. For whatever reasons that ended up not happening. The people in charge decided to kind of pull the plug on that. It seemed like they weren't sure if they would still be ranked as high enough to be in the mix for that after losing to App State. Kind of turns out afterwards they very well could have been. It was no lock, but they should have been in the mix. Like Liberty gets in there. I think an 11-1 JMU team that lost to a good App State had a fairly solid case. Not a lock, but it would have been an interesting debate, going into that last few weeks of the season. But it ends up not happening, and it ends up being, a good end to the year for JMU. They win their regular season finale. They lose their bowl game after, a lot of transition with Kurt Signetti leaving. So they had a skeleton coaching staff and roster and everything for the bowl game. But, to go 11-2 in the second year transition was still a huge accomplishment, and kind of capped off, a wild fall that, led into basketball and everything else that, just kind of continued to roll this whole season for them.
Yeah, you mentioned Kurt Signetti. He obviously left to take the job at Indiana. It just seems like JMU is just a stepping stone for these coaches to go into bigger roles, because these bigger Power 5 schools, SEC schools, what have you. But it's just crazy to see all these great coaches building JMU up and they're just leaving. And I really don't like it, whether it's correct or not. I really don't like the fact that he left before coaching the bowl game. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's rough, and I understand why they do it, particularly in football. And that's another thing that I think is kind of on the NCAA. Like, when you look at college football, once December comes around, you've got the transfer portals open, but the bowl games have not been played. Coaches are being hired different places. It's like, imagine if the NFL, right before the playoffs started, they also opened free agency. And so, like, imagine the Chiefs were getting ready for the first round, playoff game, and but actually Miami really wants to sign Patrick Mahomes. He might not play for you in the playoffs, which is essentially what happens in college football. Is they have the offseason and the postseason at the same time, and no other sport does that. So it creates these situations like that for coaches where, okay, I'm taking this job, and it's the right move for me. And if I'm going to make this move, then I also have to start putting my roster together right now, even though my season's not over. And like, if the NCAA could just push that offseason stuff back until after the bowl games, I think it would stop a lot of that. People would stick with their teams through the end of the season. But, right now, like, if you're not building your roster for next year, even before the bowl games begin, you're falling behind. And I get why the coaches do it, but it's really tough on everyone to do it that way.
So JMU, to wrap that segment up into a bow, great season. They don't have to worry about any sort of not getting into bowls next year because they're full Sun Belt. The transition's over. They're under new head coach Bob Chesney, which he was introduced. Briefly, your thoughts. Obviously, Coach Chesney came from Holy Cross, I believe. Just take me through what you've seen after covering his opening press conference and so on.
Seeing, through spring ball and everything, it's a different vibe around JMU. It's a lot more, Kurt Signetti is very old school type of coach, and, more the type who's kind of like the CEO of the entire organization, and he overlooks everything. And, he's not as vocal or active during practices. He kind of observes, lets his position coaches do their thing. We didn't particularly love, like, having to do the stuff outside of football, whether it's, the stuff with the donors, the stuff with the media, everything else. Like, if he could have just locked himself into a room and watched film until he went to sleep and then woke up and started planning the next practice, like, if that was his life, he would have been perfectly content. But there's other things a head football coach has to do. Bob Chesney is just as organized and just as detail oriented as Curt Cignetti, but also likes to, bring that energy. He gets out in practice and he's bouncing around to the different position groups. He's in there talking, he's instructing, he's getting involved. He even, he early on in spring ball, he got out there and he started punting with the punter, and they were having a contest to see who could, like, kick it the furthest. And just really hard to imagine Curt Cignetti ever doing that during a practice. And Chesney brings that. He's also, wants to be kind of more involved in the community, get out, to schools and things like that. And he just brings a different kind of energy. Definitely more involved in the personal side of things, as far as, getting involved with players and their lives, and also, being able to connect with fans on a different level, which I think might be the right thing at the right time for JMU, as they've got to increase their donorship, their donor base, get people involved. If they want to ever expand their stadium and keep their season ticket sales up there, like, getting out there more in the community is going to be a big thing. And, he's won everywhere he's been prior to JMU. So I think, the expectation is he'll continue to win at JMU with the resources he has, but it's going to be a little bit different feel, just personality wise, I think, between the coaches, though they've both been very successful doing it the way they do. I don't think there's necessarily one right way or wrong way to do it. People are definitely going to notice there's a difference with this coaching staff, basically just how much they hear from them.
Yeah, very good stuff. So moving on the timeline in the successful sports season that JMU has had, both men's and women's basketball on both sides, looking very great. Obviously, men's basketball gets into the NCAA tournament, wins the first tournament game, which is huge for the JMU Dukes, and big to put Harrisonburg and JMU on the map even more. But yet you have that, then Mark Byington goes to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, kind of a similar feel to the football season, the way it ended and everything. Because, even like, you talk about the similar feel, we go back to the college game day coming to Harrisonburg and the huge crowd and everything. And that kind of, I think, that kind of had a lot of people say, like, whoa, like, JMU, who knew that they had, like, this big of a campus, this many fans and things like that. And the same thing kind of happened in basketball at the NCAA tournament. All I heard in Brooklyn at the NCAA tournament was, like, I can't believe how many JMU fans are here, how many are in New York, how much purple is in this building and are walking around Brooklyn and everything. And people were just shocked to know JMU had that kind of fan base. And then they go through it again a little bit, even the day after they're out of the NCAA tournament, Mark Byington leaves, and similar situation. You can't turn down the SEC or the Big Ten money. You kind of knew it was going to happen. But, JMU's kind of put themselves in position to continue to make good hires. And I think that's been the key is, they're moving on with Preston Spradlin, who's like Bob Chesney on the football side. Preston's had a lot of success where he's been. Basketball, he's been to a couple NCAA tournaments. So, I think that's been the key for JMU kind of all around, is being able to keep their momentum and figuring out a way to do that and make good hires. And, when you're a successful mid-major, if you get 4 or 5 good years out of a coach and he moves on, then that's the best case scenario, really. I mean, you make those hires thinking you're probably going to make another hire in 5 years. And it's just a matter of, is it because we won a lot, or is it because we didn't win and we had to make a change? And, for JMU, they've been fortunate that they've lost these guys because they've won a lot.
Which is a good thing, but with the coach leaving, but it obviously new reign. See what Preston Spradlin brings to the table. I've seen his credentials. He looks like a pretty good fit. But for the women's side, Shauna Reagan, fingers crossed he's not leaving. But the women's team had a pretty good year as well.
Yeah, a little bit disappointing because I think, they came in probably the favorites in the Sun Belt. And then Marshall ended up being a huge surprise in women's basketball in the Sun Belt. They had a first-year head coach, Kim Caldwell, who actually, after 1 year at Marshall, gets the job at Tennessee. So they've gone through there in the women's basketball side of things. But Marshall had an incredible year, and that was a surprise that they went through the Sun Belt regular season almost unscathed. Their only loss was to JMU. So JMU had a pretty solid season on the women's basketball side, and then lose in overtime in the Sun Belt championship game to Marshall. So they were that close to making it back to the NCAA tournament for a second straight year. It's been a really solid program under Sean O'Regan, like you said. You talk about the coaches leaving. That's one where I would never say never, but being a JMU alum and having worked there under Kenny Brooks before taking the head coaching job, and he's been there 8 years now. If he continues to have success where he's consistently going to the NCAA tournament, he's going to get some calls, but it's also going to take, I think, the very right job for him to leave. Just given his long history with JMU and Harrisonburg and everything else. I'm not saying he'll never leave, but it's not necessarily going to be the first Power 5 job. And it hasn't been the first Power 5 job that's called him and wanted to talk that's lured him away. And, that's the good thing for JMU women's basketball is, we talk about the rise of the men's basketball team over the past 4 or 5 years. The women's basketball team has been there for a couple decades now. And, frankly, there are Power 5 jobs that are better jobs than JMU, but when it comes to women's basketball and the facilities they have and the support that they get, and everything else, not every Power 5 job is a better job than women's basketball than JMU is. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of sports, but for women's basketball, they've been able to retain people because of this program's been around and it's been up there and it's recruited at that level for a long time.
So moving on to the current season that's getting ready to wrap up. I'm not sure how much coverage you do in baseball and softball, but still 2 programs trending up. If you're covering them, just take me through how you've liked the baseball and softball season thus far.
It's been a good baseball season, sort of a surprise baseball season. They're, in the mix for the NCAA tournament in baseball, which I think would just be kind of the cherry on top for everything else. We haven't even mentioned, that, the volleyball and both soccer teams made the NCAA tournament. And, it's been that kind of year where just everybody's had a really good year for JMU, and baseball hasn't been there in a long time. And, frankly, Marlon Eikenberry, their head coach, has been on the hot seat more often than not, but has stuck around, and, they have a chance to get to the NCAA tournament. Softball, it's been a little bit slower rebuild, I think, since going to the College World Series in 2021. It's taken some time to get back to that level. But they're competitive in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt's a much tougher softball conference than what they were in the CAA. It's a potential multi-bid league, but JMU's really just kind of been trying to rebuild for a couple of years now, and they're getting the talent in there. They're young. They need to find the consistent pitching to get back to where they've been. And frankly, they had a really disappointing weekend this past day. They'd been building a lot of momentum. They looked like they might be making some moves up towards the top of the Sun Belt. And then they got swept at Georgia Southern last weekend. And that was pretty disappointing weekend. But overall, I think they're getting back to the level they expect to be. But this spring, baseball has been a little more exciting than softball, which is the reverse of how it has been at JMU for the last several years.
Yep. So getting ready to kick off summer with the championships coming up, semester's about to end, and but I think the work still continues for you, Shane. Before we wrap this up, do you have any cool coverage notes, stories, anything you can share that might be coming on tap that our fans can look out for?
They introduced a new AD, Matt Roan.
I completely forgot to ask you about that too.
No, yeah, but yeah, I mean, he seems like he's going to be good. Got some stuff coming up from, just talking to him. The summer is probably going to be a lot of like paying attention to what happens to Group of Five football and NIL, and talk of if they do their own playoff for Group of Five, things like that. Kind of trying to dig into that. So wait and see what happens. In the coming months, but it slows down, but it not really. It's just a different kind of thing. You're not covering as many games, but there's definitely stuff happening during the summer to try to keep up with in college sports.
Matt Roan dropped a nugget, and I'm not sure if you tweeted this or somebody else, Shane, but he mentioned the potential of expanding Bridgeforth Stadium, which a lot of people are for doing.
Yeah, I did tweet that. That's something I asked about, following the press conference when I had him on one-on-one a little bit. And, I think it's been part of the plan for JMU for a long time, just kind of waiting for the right opportunities to fund it and everything else. But, definitely get the sense from him coming in that, he wants to continue to build off the momentum that's there. Right now they sold out season tickets 2 years in a row, which was huge. And now they've got a waiting list that's getting close to about 1,000 donor accounts, which, then if you expect each person who's on the waiting list, they're not just going to buy single tickets, they're buying 2, 3, 4 seats. So, you're talking about probably 2,000 to 3,000 more season ticket holders out there if they want to expand the stadium. Right now it's about 24,000. They averaged more than that for the last year. So the demand is there. When they built the side of the stadium, the new side, about 10 years ago, I think the plan was always, now when the demand's there, we can go on the other side and match it and bring that capacity up. And I think that's something that's going to happen in the relatively near future, within the next few years. Work will start on that, but no firm details on that. But everything Matt Roan said, that seems like something that's definitely on his radar to start working on the fundraising for that. I think that'll be something that'll be key for him.
So Jeff Bourne leaving JMU after a long tenure there as athletic director, Matt Roan taking his place. How important is it in your mind, Shane, covering JMU for quite some time, to have a good athletic director in place for a successful programs that JMU has had?
It's huge. I mean, you look at, Jeff Bourne, everything he's done. He's a guy who all these coaches having great success on campus right now. He hired every single one of them. And he got the facilities built. I mean, a huge reason the basketball program turned around is because they play in an arena that's better than 99% of their competition at the mid-major level. And Jeff Bourne had a huge role in getting that built and getting them to the FBS level in football. He really kind of worked behind the scenes with other athletic directors to get them that invitation to the Sun Belt Conference. And that was huge. I think, he's leaving it in a place, though, where, the differences, similar to like what I talked about in football, I think the differences that we'll see in Matt Roan and Jeff Bourne are coming at the right time, where you bring in a little bit of a younger guy who connects with your more recent graduates, your younger alumni, and gets them, involved as far as, being Duke Club members and getting involved. Maybe they can't make huge contributions right now, but, if you're 25 years old and a few years out of college and you just get into the habit of being a Duke Club member, and hey, maybe when you're 40, you hit it big and you can become like a big time donor. You're cultivating that. And I think Matt Roan's a guy who can connect with that group in particular, just bringing a little bit younger energy, and, his family seems like great. They seem like they're going to really love being in Harrisonburg and be out there. And, the groundwork has been laid. We talk about expanding the stadium and stuff, but there's not a lot of stuff he has to do to build from scratch. He has to kind of, be the man to continue to build on the foundation that's there. And I think my initial impression of him is he's a guy who can do that.
So much positivity coming from Harrisonburg, Virginia. Beautiful school, beautiful campus JMU has had. And it looks like things are trending in the right direction even more. Some change and whatnot. But come next season, a football program, which I'm sure you'll be covering nonstop, Shane, under the direction of Bob Chesney in the Sun Belt Conference proper with no restrictions, already covering spring ball as well. Before we wrap things up, once again, a huge thanks to our sponsors, PM Plus Reserve, Shenandoah Primitives, Transformative Alignment Group, Mark Francis with Icon Real Estate, Barrett, Pest, and Termite Services, Shenandoah Music, Mark Lynch with Guild Mortgage, and the official energy drink of the Kirby on Sports podcast, Don't Sleep Energy. Use promo code KOS Podcast for 12% off your order every single time. Shane, I know we can go on for days and days about the rise of JMU athletics, but I'll just say it was a pleasure having you on, my friend. And I'm sure the spring ball and the football season will be taking you by storm with typing all your great articles and everything for the Daily News Record.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate it. And it's been good talking to you.
Absolutely. Once again, Shane Mettlen with the Daily News Record. Check out all his work down south, the Daily News Record. Shane, appreciate your time again. Hopefully we can do it again soon, my friend.
All right. Thanks. Take care.